Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all well. I noticed in the list of participants that we have Aisha Al-Suwaidi. Aisha, are you our current student or are you not a student in the IDI?
I'm not a student in the university, but I already signed in because I'm still in grade 11. Yeah, I'm trying to learn new things.
Okay, fantastic. Because we also, at DIDI, we have another student, a student with exactly the same name and family name. So I was just wondering if you were one of our students. Yes, we have an Aisha Al-Suwaidi.
But maybe, Mr.
Okay.
In the future, I'll be one of your students.
Oh, hopefully in the future, that would be fantastic. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
So for all the people that have joined and are joining, we have currently 36 participants, but we'll probably wait around 5 more minutes because people are just entering, and then we will start. We actually opened the chat a bit earlier, 10 minutes earlier, but that's good. Again, thank you everybody for joining and welcome to today's DIDI workshop. Again, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining. For the people that have just recently joined, we are still waiting a few minutes because there's still people entering our waiting room, but we will start shortly. Good afternoon, everybody. For the people that just joined recently, thank you for joining. And just to let you know, we will be starting shortly. Okay, so let's start. Good afternoon, everybody, again. My name is Dr. Carlos Montaña, and I'm an associate professor of design here at DIDI. I'm originally trained as an industrial designer, but basically I have worked in academia for the past probably 15 years, and I've lived and worked. I'm originally from Colombia, South America, but I've lived and worked in Italy, Japan, Singapore, Australia, and now the UAE. And it's my pleasure today to conduct this workshop about bugs, textiles, and robots. And this is basically an excuse to link these topics and talk about innovation inspired by nature. So I'm going to stop my video just because it allows me to concentrate a bit more in my talk. But I would also like, well, one, to know if everybody is hearing me clearly, if the sound is okay. Can a few people just say yes, unmute your microphones and say yes if the sound is okay?
Yes.
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 Okay, fantastic. That's very good. And I'm actually also hearing you very well, so that's great. Okay. So in this workshop, what we're going to do is what we're often told not to do in school. So please, what I will ask you is that while I talk and I explain some of the examples, I want you to draw. And also when I ask questions, I want you to please talk. Because I don't want this to be a very boring session where I just talk and talk and talk and you're like watching to a movie. But I would really want to hear your opinions, your thoughts, and so on. And again, during the process of this workshop, please, if you haven't done so, go get some white sheets of paper, get your pencils, colors, and so on, as we requested in the documents for the participation in the workshop, because we want you to generate some ideas and create some designs for the future through our conversation. Now, this is your design challenge. So while we talk and while we discuss some ideas around bugs and robots and textiles and many other interesting things, I want you to imagine and draw how we will colonize outer space in the future. So I want you to draw ideas of how we can live in the moon, of how we can live in Mars, of how we can go to Mars in a more effective way, what we would eat in Mars, what we would play in Mars, what sort of machines we would have in Mars, how are we going to construct our buildings in Mars. So this is your design challenge. And through this talk, I'm going to give you some ideas and I'm going to show you some examples of what different teams of designers and researchers have done. So again, please get your paper and pencils, and please be inspired while we talk. Think about bugs, think about textiles, think about robots, think about the new technologies, imagine the future, and we hope to see afterwards what are some of the ideas that you come up with through this workshop. So I will start with a 5-minute video that shows a project by Norman Foster and Partners, who is a very important architect worldwide, in collaboration with the European Space Agency, and how they see that we could maybe construct or inhabit the moon. They have done some projects to propose how to construct cities in the moon and in Mars, and this is one of these projects. Please have a look again to contextualize our project and think about how are we going to live in outer space. Oops. I think it stopped. Let's try again.
Planet Earth is protected by the atmosphere, the layer of air and gas that surrounds it. The atmosphere shields the Earth from solar radiation, keeps the temperature balanced, and protects us from meteoroids. On the Moon's south pole, you can see almost perpetual sunlight on the horizon. This is the site of our lunar base. Conditions on the Moon are very different from those on Earth. Because the Moon has no atmosphere, there is no protection from solar radiation. There are extreme temperature fluctuations. And there is no protection from gamma radiation, and no protection from meteoroids. The lunar lander has detached from the rocket launch and is on a course to Shackleton's crater, the Moon's south pole. Inside the lander is a cylinder which contains an inflatable dome and 2 robot 3D printers. After the cylinder containing the habitation capsule has been unloaded, a dome is inflated from one end. This provides the support structure for construction, a little like scaffolding is used to build on Earth. The lunar habitation is built by a robot-operated 3D printer. At one end, it has a scoop to collect the regolith. In the center are the containers for the printing material. At the other end, there is a robotic arm with a printing head. The robot collects regolith from the Moon's surface. Layers of this moon dust are built up over the dome to create the protective shell. This process takes about 3 Earth months. The shell is made up of a hollow, closed cellular structure. Under a microscope, it would look very similar to the close-up of a bird's bone. Like a bone, it is light and incredibly strong at the same time. When the lunar base is complete, it can house 4 people. Inside the dome, they are protected from meteorites, gamma radiation, and high temperature fluctuations. The original capsule functions as an airlock and technical support module. The skylights draw daylight into the living and workspaces, which are sheltered within a pressurized enclosure. This method is a pioneering advance in space-age construction. At Foster & Partners, we're used to designing for some of the world's most extreme climates. We often use materials found locally to create sustainable buildings on Earth. While the Moon is an exciting new territory for architecture, the value of this logic endures.
Okay, so for the people that just very recently joined, I'm just going to go again through the brief, and it's the design challenge. So while I'm giving this talk and while I'm showing some examples, I want you all to imagine and draw how we will colonize outer space in the future, and try to be inspired by some of the bugs, textiles, and robots that we're going to see through the presentation. Okay, so that was an eye-opener or an introduction to what living in outer space or what living in the moon can be. Now I have to do a little warning. We have creepy bugs coming soon. So if you are aware, if you are afraid of insects, if you have some sort of phobias, arachnophobia or something like that, you might want to consider closing your eyes. Because yes, we are going to see some creepy bugs. Okay, so let's start with this little beauty. And here I will start to ask some questions. As I told before, I would like to do this session interactive and not just me talking. So what is interesting about this picture? For me, it's a bug and a textile. What is interesting about this bug and this textile? Can somebody say something? Can someone say something about this?
Well, the spider and that spider silk.
Yes.
Spider silk is actually considered one of the most natural or one of the most strongest natural polymers out there.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. What's your name?
I'm Disneem.
Disneen. Thank you very much, Disneen. That's actually a really important information. So one is the spider web. The spider web is made from silk, and silk is made from proteins. And one of the beauties of the spider webs is that it's actually stronger than steel, but it is 50 times lighter. So a very interesting material, very strong, but that we can produce naturally. And the spiders produce it, well, without using machines like we do, or without using a lot of energy, but basically with water-based natural materials. So it's a very, very interesting textile, this textile. What about the bug itself? What about the spider? What could be interesting about spiders? Hello, yes, the person that has the microphone on. What could be interesting or what could be non-interesting about spiders? What would you hate about spiders?
Spiders are actually pretty cool. They're pretty interesting. Like there's so many things about them. Like for example, we know that some spiders are venomous, some spiders are not. We also know that there are also some species of spiders that that after they mate, they eat their mate, right? And like there's a lot you can talk about spiders if you wish to.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot we could start. Thank you very much. That's actually really true. We could talk a lot about spiders if we're entomologists and study insects and animals, but we can talk also a lot about spiders, or we can learn a lot from spiders if we're designers or engineers or innovators. And here is where our robots come in. So this is a relatively simple robot, like a toy. We actually do some of these in the DIDI, and we use Arduino, and we use the basic electronics and basic sensors. This, again, it's more like a toy, but one of the things that we also imitate a lot is how some animals move to create some of these robots. So we could imitate the form of spiders and have just toys that look like spiders. We can imitate the function of spiders, so we can have robots like this one that walk like spiders. But even more interesting is if we are able, for example, to imitate the process that spiders have when they're actually doing the spider web. And if we think about it, it's like a natural 3D printer. And the spider is basically creating this material, which is organic and sustainable, and creating the environment around it. And it's going to use it to eat, it's going to use it to live, it's going to use it for many, many purposes. So here we start seeing a bit of how we can think about bugs, textiles, and robots. Now,
Carlos?
let's go to it. Yes?
Yeah, we have a question in the chat. Someone's asking, is there any benefit if the robot moves like a spider?
Okay. Yes, actually there is. Usually in all the different studies around robotics, many people try to imitate the movement of insects, because insects and animals can move in many different terrains and in many different ways. So we know that cars or vehicles that have tires cannot climb a mountain, for example, or cannot climb a wall or so on. But when in the robots, when we imitate the way these animals move, we can actually create robots that can go into crevices or climb mountains or so on. So yes, there are many benefits of imitating how animals and insects move. And I will elaborate a bit more on that later when I show some other examples. Thank you, Razan, for the questions. I don't have my chat on, but please feel free to ask. So what do we see here? Can anybody tell me?
It's a weaver ant.
It's a weaver ant. Exactly. And what is interesting about the weaver ants?
They usually make their nest from a rare type of silk.
Mm-hmm.
And this silk is from the mouth of their own grubs.
Yes. Exactly. Oh, you all know a lot. That's fantastic. You come with lots of knowledge. So this is a weaver ant, and this is the weaver ant's nest. And we could say that the weaver ant is like the insect version of squeezing glue inside a bottle and squeezing it and almost 3D printing or printing the nest. So what the weaver ants do is that they take the larvae, they squeeze them, they put this organic glue, and they start connecting all the different leaves of a tree with this textile, with this glue. And basically they construct their houses like that. Now we've discussed the bugs, we've discussed the textile, now let's have a look at the robot. We could develop robots that actually weave based on the weaver ants or based on the spiders, but one of the most common elements of study that we have with insects is actually what we call swarm behavior, or how a colony behaves and how they can move around and communicate with each other. So that people are developing many of such robots that communicate with each other and work. And we also see applications for that, for example, for autonomous vehicles and so on. So day to day, we're learning a lot about insects, about social animals, and how we can apply some of these principles to design and innovation. And all this is called biomimicry. There's many different other words: biomimesis, biomechanics, bionics. Biomimicry was popularized in 1997 by Janine Benyus, and it comes from the Greek bios, which means life, and mimesis, which comes imitation. And this is her book, and it's basically about innovation inspired by nature. Again, it was written in 1997. I have done much research in biomimicry also, and I wrote this book 10 years ago in 2010. And things have evolved a lot in the last 10 years. So I'll show you also some of the past and recent examples of biomimicry. So what biomimicry proposes, again, innovation inspired by nature, but that we can use nature as model, measure, and mentor. So basically we can learn from nature and in many ways and imitate nature. But probably one of the most important elements of biomimicry is that it also, by saying that we use nature as measure, we say that we respect nature's boundaries, or we respect nature. And that gives biomimicry an environmental component to it. What can we say about this image?
Camouflage.
It could be camouflage, yes. It's a little bird from New Zealand, but it's actually turning greenish, and it starts to camouflage with the surroundings. And for me, it's the idea of designs being connected with the surroundings or connected to the environment. So when biomimicry proposes that we can use nature as measure, it means that we use ecological standards to judge the rightness of our innovations, or basically that we try to respect the limits of nature when we design using biological principles. And according to Janine Benyus, there's different levels of biomimicry. And I diagrammed them here. So we have what we could call imitating form. And again, as according to Benyus's classification, it goes from shallow biomimicry to deep biomimicry. So the more shallow one, the easiest one, the most obvious, is to imitate the form. So if we take the spider and we do a spider toy, we're basically just imitating the form or the shape and the colors of the spider. And that's very easy in a way. The next level of biomimicry is to imitate its function, how it works, how it moves, how it operates. Even a bit more difficult is to imitate the processes. For example, digestive processes, or the processes, how they produce materials and so on. And then even more difficult is to imitate ecosystems, how different elements operate in a system to make it sustainable. And if we take again the example of the spider before, of the bug, just having a robot or a toy is basically shallow biomimicry. It's just imitating its form or its function. Maybe having robots which are a bit more advanced and how they work together is more about function and processes. It's a bit more complex. But the ideal situation is when we as designers or engineers or innovators actually manage to imitate ecosystems and to imitate how different products or different elements in our society could interact respecting each other. So if we're able to develop construction methods that just, let's say, with organic or biodegradable materials, materials that respect nature and so on, this is the ideal of biomimicry. As part of my research, I tried to study some products or some theories or some elements in the last century, from the Industrial Revolution to our days. And again, I did this separation of form inspired from nature, function inspired from nature, and processes and systems inspired by nature. So let's go through some of them. So maybe in the late 1800s, there was the arts and crafts movement, which then evolved to the Art Nouveau and Art Deco movements, and that's a bit of the history of design and the history of art. And there, many artists and designers and craftsmen were inspired by nature and were basically copying natural forms. Then we moved to the organicism of the 1950s, mid last century, and again, many new materials gave possibilities to develop some of these very organic shapes. And then recently, from year 2000 and so on, we have what has been called the blobjects, or objects that are very organic, that look like little creatures, that look like natural objects. And again, this is basically focused towards industrial design, product design, architecture, and so on. However, if we look at function from nature, we see that there's a lot of technologies that have been developed from nature also. So if we think of it, well, one of the first inventions of airplanes, most of the airplanes were developed from observation of birds and flying animals. Even the barbed wire is basically a replication of some of the spines in plants. We have robots, we have the cat eyes, we have the artificial hearts or artificial organs, and then we have many others that I will explain later. And finally, when we look at processes and systems from nature, it's basically big ways of thinking. So in architecture and urban planning, we have, for example, in the 1950s, the metabolic and symbiotic architecture by Kisho Kurokawa. And basically these architects were looking at the city or at the building as a metabolism, as a living creature that has metabolic processes, or that is symbiotic, that is related to other creatures in the same environment. We have then the urban metabolism, urban ecology, industrial ecology, biomimicry, and many other movements. So let's go through some of the classics of design inspired by nature. In this case, it's basically about plants, animals, and textiles. So, well, the title is there, so I won't ask you what it is. I'll basically tell you it's the birth of Velcro. But does somebody know why it is related to plants, animals, and textiles?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, so there's a story that George de Mestral. He was taking his dog out for a walk, and his dog's fur got caught on one of the plants. And when his dog's fur got caught on a certain type of plant, and this plant stuck to the dog's fur. So the plant acts as a scratchy part in the Velcro, and the dog's fur acts as the soft part. Exactly.
Thank you very much. Not many people know the story unless you've studied biomimicry or bio-inspired design. So this was in Invent Velcro, which is the common textile that we use to close our wallets and backpacks and so on, and it has two adhesive surfaces. Basically, it was an invention by observation of nature. So the plant is actually a seed, it's a burr, and it has these little hooks, which are called barbels. And these hooks cling to animal furs because the seeds need to travel distances to spread. So when this inventor saw this, he tried to replicate the idea of the little hooks and the hairs, and that's how he created Velcro. Now, another example of animals, skins, and textiles. This is the fast skin invention in 2000 by Speedo. So basically what they did was that they looked at the microstructure of the shark skin, and they saw that the shark is very efficient, very hydrodynamic, very fast swimmer, but it doesn't have, let's say, a smooth skin. It has these textures in the skin, and these textures actually help reduce the drag. So the people in Speedo imitated this structure for their textiles, and this was the fastest swimwear for many years. In some of the Olympics, probably 80% of the people that won were using some of these swimming suits. And actually, at a certain point, these swimming suits were banned because the Olympians, the swimmers, were saying that the swimming suit was giving too much advantage to the competitors versus the competitors that didn't wear this swimming suit. So again, another example of how we can imitate nature to innovate. Gecko tape was invented in 2003. So the beauty of the gecko is that without any glue or without any chemicals, but just with the microstructures and some hairs in the legs, it can basically cling to any surface. And here in Dubai, you see many little geckos climbing the walls very easily and so on. So what scientists did was that they studied the microstructure of the legs of the gecko. They replicated it, and they actually created some tapes and some adhesives that can add to many different surfaces. And building on that, some laboratories even created some robots that imitate the movement and the crawling of the geckos. So basically, just to tell you that understanding nature and biology can help us to design and innovate. And again, that's the whole idea of biomimicry, bio-inspired design. It's also called biomimetics, and so on. So just as a reminder, and for the people that maybe have joined the workshop a bit late, we want to draw scenarios or ideas of how we can conquer outer space or design solutions for outer space, maybe to live in Mars or to live in the moon, based on some of the ideas that we're discussing around learning from nature. So please continue thinking about the different textiles, bugs, robots that we're discussing, and think how we can incorporate some of these ideas. And while I talk and while we have this discussion, please draw some sketches of how you imagine this could be applied for outer space. This is a 6-minute video which summarizes the idea of biomimicry and some of the recent examples.
In 1989, Japan's Shinkansen bullet train had a problem. It was fast, really fast, like pushing 170 miles per hour fast. But every time it exited a tunnel, it was loud. The noise was coming from a variety of sources, but whenever a train sped into a tunnel, it pushed waves of atmospheric pressure through the other end. The air exited tunnels with a sonic boom that could be heard 400 meters away. In dense residential areas, that was a huge problem. So an engineering team was brought in to design a quieter, faster, and more efficient train. And they had one secret weapon. Eiji Nakatsu, the general manager of the technical development department, was a bird watcher.
Different components of the redesigned bullet train were based on different birds. Owls inspired the pantograph. That's the rig that connects the train to the electric wires above. Nakatsu modeled the redesign after their feathers, reducing noise by using the same serrations and curvature that allow them to silently swoop down to catch prey. The Adelie penguin, whose smooth body allows it to swim and slide effortlessly, inspired the pantograph's supporting shaft, redesigned for lower wind resistance. And perhaps most notable of all was the kingfisher.
The kingfisher is a bird that dives into water to catch its prey. The unique shape of its beak allows it to do that while barely making a splash. Nakatsu took that shape to the design table. The team shot bullets shaped like different train nose models down a pipe to measure pressure waves and dropped them into water to measure the splash size. The quietest nose design was the one modeled most closely after the kingfisher's beak. When the redesign debuted in 1997, it was 10% faster, used 15% less electricity, and stayed under the 70 decibel noise limit in residential areas. And it did all that with the wings of an owl, the belly of a penguin, and the nose of a kingfisher. There's a name for design like this. It's called biomimicry.
The people who design our world usually never take a biology class, believe it or not. So they're novices in how the world works.
That's Janine Benyus. Back in 1997, she wrote the book that coined the term biomimicry. It told the story of the innovations in computing, energy, and health that were inspired by structures in the natural world.
Stick like a gecko, compute like a cell, even run a business like a redwood forest.
Benyus has since worked as a consultant for various companies, trying to get them to understand how to take design ideas from nature. That might mean studying prairie dog burrows to build better air ventilation systems, mimicking shark skin to create bacteria-resistant plastic surfaces for hospitals, or arranging wind turbines in the same drag-reducing pattern that schools of fish swim in. Designers get inspiration from a lot of different places, but Benyus thinks many of them could benefit from looking more at the natural world.
So there's a lot of sort of looking at what other people have done, and what they do is they look at all the others and they get ideas. They literally do, you know, a lot of designers have lots of magazines that they look through. They tear those out and they put them on inspiration boards. But they're looking at other human technologies.
Her idea was simple. Designers should get in the habit of bringing a biologist to the table and let them help solve problems by mimicking nature. And there are three main ways they can do that.
You know, you can mimic its form or its shape. You might create a paint for a building that when it dries, it's got the same structure as self-cleaning leaves. Lotus leaves are notoriously great. They let rainwater clean the leaf because they have these bumps, and the rainwater balls up on the bumps and then it pearls away the dirt. So that lotus effect is physical, and you can create a physical structure on the outside of any product. Imagine that on the outside of your car. Rainwater would clean your car. So that's mimicking form, but there's also mimicking process. The processes in the natural world. It might even be, you know, how you mimic how ants communicate in order to efficiently find sources of food or new places to live. And those processes, that self-organization, has been mimicked in software. You know, in things like, autonomous cars and how they're going to move in flocks through the city by talking to one another. That's mimicking nature's process. And then you jump up to the level of mimicking whole ecosystems, right? There's a thing that's a buzzword right now that's really hot called the circular economy, which is essentially, you know, industry saying, you know, there should be no such thing as a byproduct in our manufacturing facility that goes to landfill. It should be used by something else, right? And at the end of a product's life, that product should be upcycled into something else. It's being called the circular economy. Ecosystems do that really, really, really well. You've got a log on the forest floor, and those materials move up into the body of the fungus that eats it. Those materials move up into a mouse, and that mouse material moves up into a hawk, right? And if you think about that as what we'd like to do with local materials being upcycled constantly in our cities, for instance, those ecosystem lessons are really big for us.
And that's the end goal for biomimetic design, making products, systems, and cities functionally indistinguishable from the natural world. Life has been around on Earth for 3.8 billion years, and what designers are starting to realize is that is a lot of research and development time.
The people who design our world have a lot to learn from the natural world. All they have to do is take a look.
Thank you so much for watching.
Okay, so let's continue. That's basically a summary around biomimicry. And again, I think it's a very, very important discipline and field of research, but we're now seeing that this is actually evolving. So many people, many researchers, many designers are evolving from biomimicry to other movements like bio-design or next nature. And that means that we're moving from imitating nature to a technological enhancement of nature, or nature blending with technology, or also to a biological enhancement of design, where we use biological elements or we grow materials, not just as an inspiration, but we actually use them as part of our designs. Here in the images, you see the book of Next Nature, and they have a very interesting and cool website. And what they argue is that nature nowadays is not the unspoiled nature that we think about. Nature has been blending with technology, and that we're basically creating cyborgs, or we're creating this mixture of technology and robots with natural elements. So it's a bit of a critique, but babies that could be born with cell phones or with electronic implants or so on. Or they talk, for example, even here in Dubai, about the communications towers that look like palm trees, and they're basically technological palm trees. And so let's look at also at some examples around next nature and bio-design. Let's look at designs and innovations that grow. And again, another reminder, please continue drawing, please don't stop drawing, and think about the bugs, textiles, and robots that we're seeing, and propose your ideas on how we can conquer space or live in outer space, live in Mars, from some of the ideas that you're seeing here. So this is a robot called the plantoids. And usually most of the robots, they imitate how insects move, or they imitate how animals move and so on, but very few imitate plants. This was arguably the first robot that was imitating plants. And it's a robot that basically tries to grow. So the whole idea is that this robot could 3D print the green elements that you see there, which become like the roots, and that the robot could grow like a plant. So in a way, it's moving by growing. These are sculptures, kinetic sculptures, a bit more art, but still design, created by a company called Nervous Systems in 2014. And basically, they used growth algorithms in nature to create these illusions. And these are basically a series of 3D printed elements with the different steps of, let's say, the growth of coral or other elements. And when they spin it very quickly, it gives the illusion of movement and of growth, which is also related to cinema and cinematography and so on. In architecture nowadays, there's many people that are experimenting with new ways of building, with making buildings alive, or making buildings that self-heal or self-repair, buildings that can grow and adapt, maybe like bones, or maybe like other elements. So in this case, with the Bioscaffold by Natalie Almina, it's a project from 2015. It basically proposes a building that grows, adapts, and self-repairs. And it would create an organic structure with mycelium, which is a fungus, and it would grow. And another example from architecture, and again, this is more around bio-design, or how we use natural elements or organic elements or creatures to incorporate them in our designs. This is the urban algae folly by Ecologic Studio. So the idea is that they used spirulina, which is a microalgae, and this algae very, very quickly grows with the sun. So the basic principle behind this design is that when there's a lot of sun, the algae grows a lot and becomes green, makes the shelter green, but covers people or creates a shade by growing algae. And new research, many researchers around the world are growing biomaterials because it's basically part of our sustainable future. So one of the ideas and what many people are experimenting with is not using fossil-based materials and plastics or non-renewable materials, but how can we grow the materials of the future, especially for architecture, for mass manufacture, and so on. So these are some experiments by a company called Biome, and they do biomaterials basically with food wastes, with fungi. Again, mycelium is being used a lot. And this is also the idea of the circular economy, where we can grow easily compostable and easily biodegradable materials. Another very interesting example is the Mycotex, which basically is growing textiles or leather-like materials from mushrooms. Myco, again, it comes from the word fungus. It's basically something that can be grown, like mushrooms. And then we have things like this, where you could grow your own clothes. And these are some of the experiments by very famous fashion designer, Suzanne Lee, who has been experimented with many of these materials for a long time and has created some grown artificial leathers, which again are much more sustainable than standard leathers. Let's look now at some designs and innovations that adapt. So again, let's go back to robots. This was 2015, yes, 2015 also. And some scientists developed a robot that adapts like animals. So the beauty of this robot, it was a crawling robot, but basically they used artificial intelligence to make the robot adapt. So what they would do is that they would take away one of the legs of the robot. And at the beginning, the robot would not be able to walk properly because it was programmed to walk with all its legs, not missing one of the legs. But by trial and error and through artificial intelligence, the robot would adapt and would learn how to walk with the missing legs. So again, we're imitating more and more how animals and how different creatures operate. Adaptive textiles and folding structures, which have many different applications. This is a very interesting project from MIT, and it's basically a hydroreactive textile. And what they did is that they created a textile that has embedded some bacteria, and the bacteria responds to sweat and humidity. So when the person that is wearing this starts to sweat or the temperature is high, then the textile opens up to create more ventilation for the users. And again, this also imitates many of the skins from animals and even from us with the opening of the pores. Okay, and these adaptive skins are also applied a lot in architecture. This specific one comes again from the shark skin, and looking at the microstructures in the shark skin and how it could be applied to buildings. Or others that are imitations of sponges, of different biological elements, and that often are related to natural ventilation, to regulation of sunlight, and some of these processes. Now, designs and innovations that move. And here we're going to definitely go into some robots again. And please, again, another reminder, continue drawing and start populating your drawings with different kinds of robots, textiles, and bugs, and different kinds of designs that we could use in Mars or in the moon. So one of the most famous developers of robots is Boston Dynamics. And basically they have developed a whole range of robots that walk and behave like different animals. So you see the big one that looks like a bull and others that look like a dog, and they have robots that move like rabbits and so on. And again, answering one of the previous questions, basically because many animals can move in difficult terrains and can react very easily. So these are all the experiments that engineers and designers are doing in robotics. And another field which is very interesting and with which our students are also playing with is the idea of soft robotics. So robots don't have to be this rigid element or with very rigid parts that move just with joints. They can also imitate elements like squids, like soft animals, like skins, and so on. And they can create movement, and they can do a lot of things by imitating this movement. And finally, we're almost going to finish. Let's look at some of the designs and innovations that have already been developed to colonize outer space. And again, another warning, creepy bugs coming soon. So please consider closing your eyes if you're afraid of some of these creepy bugs. This is really an ugly bug. Is it from outer space? Can anybody tell me what this is?
This is bacteria.
Bacteria.
This is like one of the most sturdiest forms of life form. Like it has been shown they can survive outer space and can live for many years even without the basic essentials. So I think it's something like tardigrade or pedigrade, something like that. The name is.
Yes. So it's not bacteria. It's actually a tardigrade. It's called, like the popular name is the water bear, but the technical name is tardigrade. And it's an example of a multi-extremophile. Extremophiles are creatures that can live in extreme environments. So extreme heat or extreme cold or extreme dryness. So these are creatures that can live, again, really in the most strange of environments. And the tardigrades, they're microscopic, but they can survive heat, cold, desiccation, being completely dry, lack of oxygen, and even radiation. These little animals have survived 10 days in space, and they're known to be able to live without water for 120 years, freeze to minus 272 degrees Celsius, that's almost zero, heating 151 degrees Celsius, so even more than boiling. And they can live in the vacuum in space, so they're really big survivors, big survivors. And as designers, we can use them, as some designers have done, basically to produce some cool or some creepy graphics, like the comics that we see here, or the t-shirts, or even to create very funky creatures for movies and multimedia and so on. But actually, Some people are using inspiration from the tardigrades to create protective devices and protective skins that could serve in extreme places and extreme environments. So here in the earth, it could be worn by firemen or by other people that have to deal with very extreme environments, or this could be the inspiration for protective wearables to help us live in Mars. Now, the idea of growing materials is something that is very much explored when we talk about other planets. This is one of the latest projects by our own skin, Liz Choyalco, and Officina Corpusculi by Maurizio Montalti. Actually, some of our colleagues are from Italy and they know Maurizio and have worked with him. And this was the idea of a boot to take to Mars that in a way grows in Mars. So instead of taking the whole boot or the whole gear, you take basically some parts and you take some seeds, also using mycelium, the fungus, and you grow your boots in outer space. So here we see the detail of some 3D printed parts, the insert of the mycelium that could grow there, and other materials. These are some experiments by NASA, and it's or some experiments actually by students from the University of Colorado that they were collaborating with NASA, and they were developing these robots to help people grow food in the moon or in Mars. So instead of the astronauts having to dedicate their time to grow food, they would dedicate their time to research and other activities and have different robots aid them in the production of food. And finally, another interesting proposal comes directly from NASA, and it's called myco architecture. And again, myco from mycelium and from fungus. So the idea of growing surfaces and growing textiles or blocks at the site. So what they would say is that a turtle carries its home. And when NASA is taking, let's say, like prefabricated shelters, it is working like a turtle, taking things already made to a space station. But this uses a lot of material and especially uses a lot of energy. So what if we would fabricate our shelters in the other planets and we would grow the materials to make it easier? So they would propose lightweight fibrous materials like mycelium with very good mechanical properties and materials that can be grown and self-replicate. So we're basically talking about growing houses and eventually growing cities. And researchers think that this would be much cheaper and much more effective than just trying to carry all the pre-developed shelters in rockets from Earth to the moon. I just have a couple of minutes. This is a 4-minute video of transdisciplinary design studying bugs, textiles, robots, and more. And it's basically the work of Neri Oxman, who basically established the Mediated Matter Lab in MIT. And actually, it's very important because some of our courses in DIDI come from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and literally 1 or 2 of the courses come directly from Neri Oxman. And that's again why we've combined this idea of studying robots and technology and nature for design.
Welcome to the next list. I'm Dr. Sanjay Gupta. I want to introduce you to a remarkable woman who defies definition. I want you to meet Neri Oxman.
Neri is an architect, an engineer, a designer, a scientist.
Neri Oxman believes that we could one day, in the near future, 3D print our buildings.
I don't want to design a building as I have learned. I want to question what it means to design a building.
At her lab at MIT's Media Lab, she's experimenting with different printable materials, everything from concrete to silk.
That concrete can be many things. That concrete can become a transparent window.
Neri is thinking about architecture and design in completely new ways. Her muse is nature, and her medium is the 3D printer.
Can you print DNA? Can you print with calcium? Can you make a building with calcium?
I'm Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and this is The Next List.
We're now at the MIT Media Lab. The Mediated Matter group is the group that I have founded when I arrived at the Media Lab as faculty.
Neri came as a student in computation at the secondary master's level. We don't tend to hire our own. It's just a principle. But Neri was so exceptional that when we had a big search for a position in the Media Lab, she came out on top, clearly excellent.
The Mediated Matter Research Group was founded 2 years ago as a design lab that's dedicated to exploring design that is inspired by the biological world and the natural world. How can we reinterpret 3D printing that generates or suggests a new design language that's informed by the environment? When you think about other systems in nature, one often thinks of the spider web. So the spiders are creatures of the environment that generate silk. And with that silk, they do lots of things. They create trailing routes, they capture their prey, they wrap their prey, they wrap their eggs. So they generate silk for various functions. So in a way, the spider is a kind of multi-material 3D printer. The spider itself is a kind of printing machine, only instead of printing plastics, it prints with silk. So the spider web is a form of architecture, but it is also a form of fabrication, and one cannot separate the spider web's form from the way in which it originated. Nature doesn't divide between the architect, the engineer, and the construction worker. These are processes that we're fascinated to explore.
Learning from nature is not new, but you can learn from what she sees in the growth of a tree, for example, or in the structure of the bone structure of an animal, and so on, and then take that into, kind of morph it into a set of designs.
The bark of certain trees in a northern climate might be made by nature to maximize the absorption of the sun. If you can understand that particular behavior and reproduce it, you might do a facade treatment for buildings in northern climates that maximizes the absorption of the sun. So in a way, she was trying to create a catalog of natural behaviors that could be reproduced to then be applied in many different industries.
If we're able to extract some of the...
Okay, now almost finishing. The good news is that all these projects are not exclusively from NASA or from MIT or from universities from far, far away. This is actually also something that we're doing in DIDI. So here are just a few examples of transdisciplinary bio-inspired and bio-enhanced design that we're actually conducting in DIDI. Here in this slide, I only have projects made by our students, but our faculty also has developed robots, has developed space stations, has developed medical equipment, which is inspired in nature. Some of our faculty also develop architectural projects inspired in nature, digital interfaces, and so on. But let's look at very quickly at some of the projects that our students have developed. So I'm going to move from left to right. In the left, we have a little crawler, which was that we developed in collaboration with Herman Miller, and this was actually first and second year students. And this project was developed by our student Yang Kai. And his original idea was to make a chair like a spider. And then we discussed the idea, we evolved it. And, pardon? Sorry, are there some questions? Okay. So I was talking about this design, and the original idea was a chair, but basically it turned to a baby crawler, these little devices that helps babies learn to walk. And it is inspired, as you can see, the form is inspired in a spider. Then beside it, the same student, Yang Kai, in his first year project, he designed a prosthetic device to enhance smell. And basically, he was very inspired by the elephant's nose, by the elephant's trunk. In the lower image, you see a little kangaroo. And basically, in the first year, we do robo-pets. We do robotic pets. And here the students learn about Arduino and about coding and about some simple mechanisms to make these pets move, or these little creatures move. Then in the middle, in the back, we see many samples in some round surfaces. Those are bioplastics. So as part of our workshops, our students also develop their own materials and develop their own bioplastics, materials that hopefully are more sustainable and that are biodegradable, and mixing them with different textiles and different structures. On the lower part, we have some hexagons that have some crevices that look like mouths. This is actually a project by two of our students, Nur Al-Fahim and Nayef Al-Bastaki, and they wanted to explore skins for buildings. And they developed these skins that basically react to sun and react to temperature and would open and close to allow more air or less air to control the temperature. And finally, at the far right, we see Amal's project, and she is studying in her fashion design concentration. But for one of her collections, she actually grew her own materials. She grew her own leather. So the dark brown material that you see there, it's actually grown from kombucha, which is one of these teas. It's basically a fungus that grows in tea. And she grew the material, she then dried it, and then she used it in her project. So just to show you that, again, we don't have to be NASA or MIT. In the DIDI, we're already doing some of these projects, and we're already conducting bio-inspired and bio-enhanced design. And that's it for my talk. Thank you very much. So we would really, really want to see your bio-inspired designs to colonize outer space. So I would ask you to please photograph your drawings and send them by email to Razan Al-Marzuki at didi.ae. Razan has probably been in touch already with you. And we want to make this part of our research. So as you probably saw at the beginning of the presentation, I wrote a book 10 years ago, and I'm actually currently writing a chapter in a book which talks about new approaches to bio-inspired design and innovation. So maybe, possibly, if possible, I would like to use some of your drawings and some of your designs to illustrate some possible ideas of how we can use bio-inspired design and biomimicry to think about colonizing outer space. And I'm going to start my video. So for those of you that couldn't see me, this is me. I'm Carlos Montaña, and I'm one of the professors at DIDI. And what I would suggest if anybody would like to share their screen and show us their drawing right now, that would be amazing. But if not, I would be happy to answer a few questions. And of course, we would be very happy to answer questions about the topic itself, about biomimicry and bio-design and some of the examples that we discussed. But we would also be very happy if there are any questions about DIDI, our institution, our programs of study, and so on. We would also be very happy to answer your questions. Razan, are you there? I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yes, I'm here. So if anyone has any questions about the workshop, about DIDI, now's your chance. Please let us know. You can either type it in the chat or talk to us via audio.
Yes, and very especially if some of you would like to show us your ideas and maybe to tell us a bit about it, that would be fantastic for those of you that were drawing while we were chatting and having our workshop. Oh, there we have one from Mohammed. Let me see if I can see it bigger. So Mohammed, do you want to tell us of Mars, Earth? Good. Can you tell us a bit more about your idea?
Yes. Now, what I was thinking about was Earth is habitable, right? We have plants and oxygen and water. Well, I was probably thinking that maybe we can create a tube from Mars to Earth, hopefully long enough to transport oxygen from Earth to Mars, and then like something to cover Mars to hold the oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's my idea.
Great, thank you, Mohammed. That's a great idea. That's a very futuristic idea. I had never heard about it. It does make me think about the umbilical cord, or when animals are in the womb, mammals, and they let's say receive their oxygen and their food by the umbilical cords. So yes, why not? I think that's a really interesting idea. We could create a very long tube that communicates to other planets, and we could send air or even send some other materials through that very long tube. Thank you, Mohammed. Anybody else would like to share their ideas?
Can I?
Yes, please.
I didn't sketch it properly, but I wanted to share my idea, to describe my idea. I was thinking that maybe people can construct a robot, which is based on the bug, one of the fastest bug in the world, which is known as Australian tiger beetle.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I know is that it's really fast and its speed is about 2.5 meters per second. So based on this, perhaps we can use it as a solution to improve security.
Mm-hmm.
If people start to occupy outer space, perhaps it can be used for security purposes. So that's what I thought about.
Okay, you're Sabrina, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Sabrina. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Yeah,
and actually, there are many.
It could be used to transmit messages, maybe as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever
definitely.
Yeah. So perhaps any sort of emergency cases, it can be used for transmitting messages to important departments on the outer space.
That's great. That's fantastic. Please draw it and send it to us. We would love to see your drawings. And beetles have been also widely imitated for different purposes, to gather water. There's also dung beetles that create some little balls and move with them and so on. They've been also imitated widely. It's a very interesting topic in biomimicry. Okay, thank you, Sabrina.
No problem.
Anybody else wants to share their ideas or maybe show us your drawings, or again, even ask about DIDI and our studies?
Hello.
Yes, Adib.
Yes, hello, hi, Mr. Carlos. First of all, thank you. That was very informative, the workshop and everything. Second, I just wanted to ask if there's any more, not in Ramadan, but the upcoming workshops with the idea.
Yes, we will have more throughout the summer. Just wait for my email. So we are planning them right now, and we don't want to overload students during their exams period. So they will be coming soon. We'll let you know very, very soon. So keep an eye on your emails, keep an eye on our social media, on our website, and we'll be updating them once we have them.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Razan, and thank you, Adib, for your question. And yeah, yes, some people are asking if they can leave the Zoom call. Yes, if you want to leave, that's fine. We're just giving the opportunity of a conversation and maybe to share some of the ideas for those of you who want. Now, I did see that in the chat that there was an idea of using the lotus leaf. The lotus effect is also one of the classic examples of biomimicry. So by imitating the surface of the lotus, we can develop self-cleaning paints, self-cleaning surfaces, or we can create surfaces that actually reduce the drag of boats and so on. So the lotus effect is a really, really important effect that we also study in biomimicry. Any other questions? Okay, so just to remind you, please email your drawings to Razan, and Razan will also be contacting you with the schedule for some of our other workshops. If you're interested in knowing about DIDI and knowing a bit more about our programs of study and so on, please contact us. We have had also some virtual open houses, and once we go back to normal, hopefully we will have some in-site open houses. But meanwhile, we're also doing many virtual events. We will have very possibly a virtual exhibition of projects in June. So keep an eye for that information also, and you can see some of the projects that have been developed by our students.
Sir?
Yes.
I just had a doubt. Like, would it count as biomimicry if we use geographical forms? Maybe something like the Earth's crust?
Yes, that's actually a really good question. I would say it counts. For me, biomimicry is basically imitating nature. Among biomimicry researchers, that there has been this discussion if, for example, biomimicry or bionics is the right word, because biomimicry or bio is just about living elements. But what if we imitate geology, or what if we imitate the planet itself, or even what if we imitate non-living elements like natural crystals or rock formations? For me, that's still a part of biomimicry. It's still learning from our natural environment. But that's a really good question.
Thank you, sir.
All right, any more questions before we wrap this up, whether about DIDI or the workshop? Alrighty, so just a reminder, if you want to share your drawings with us, please send it to me. I've shared my email in the chat. And if you have any questions as well, we're available anytime. So just send us an email, talk to us, and we'll get to you. Carlos, anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, basically a big thank you to everybody for participating. I hope that it was enjoyable and I hope that you learned something new. And yes, we are looking forward to see your drawings and to see your design ideas. Thank you very much, everybody.